What's up, everybody? Dr. Josh here. As a clinical psychologist and bodybuilder, I see this all the time. You start a new program, you feel excited, you feel good about the program, then 2 to 3 weeks later, you're scrolling through Instagram and you see a different program and you're all ready to jump ship. Today, we're gonna break down the psychology of program hopping, why your brain's wired for novelty, and what you can do about it so that you can stay on track. If you're interested in that or anything bodybuilding psychology related, hit subscribe and let's get to the episode. Let's start off with dopamine. Dopamine's a neurotransmitter that motivates behavior that feels good. So if you find video games to be rewarding, you're gonna get a little hit of dopamine. If you find certain foods to be hyper palatable and rewarding, that's gonna be in part due to dopamine. Additionally, starting a new exercise program is also going to give you a little hit of dopamine right off the bat. But here's the thing about dopamine. Your body is going to get used to the novelty of something and it's not going to give you as much. And eventually, novelty fades, dopamine drops, but that craving for newness is still there, and this can possibly lead to some program switching. Let's take a look at another variable, and that is soreness. So whenever we start a new program, besides the initial dopamine hit that we get, we also get the accompanying DOMS or soreness from that. And I think we mistakenly think that that is a sign of effectiveness, but we know that that's not the case. Soreness isn't a reliable indicator of effectiveness. It's just a proxy, and it can't predict strength or hypertrophy gains on its own. So this is how that addictive cycle starts. New program, dopamine hit. Soreness comes, perceived progress, motivation fades, switch program. Your brain isn't looking for the best program. Your brain is looking for novelty and the perception of progress. But progress isn't a feeling, it's something built over time. But this begs the question, why would our brain sabotage us? And one of the answer, or at least one part of the answer, since there are many layers to this, begins at the beginning of our evolutionary history. Our ancestors who explored novel environments and food sources gained survival advantages. Because these ancestors were more likely to survive, they passed on genetic predispositions which favored novelty-seeking behavior. In the modern context, this inherited evolutionary drive manifests itself as continual program switching, and it's further exacerbated by constant exposure to new fitness information. However, this abundance of choices driven by our evolutionary desire for novelty can also drive indecision, and this indecision is known as the paradox of choice. Essentially, the paradox of choice highlights that our modern environment leads to indecision and a lot of second guessing. So in psychology, there was a study, and we'll just call it the toothpaste study. So in this toothpaste study, you have two sets of participants. One set of participants who was given an abundance of choices, right? And then you have another set of participants that were given fewer choices. Now, whenever looking at these two groups, at the end of the study, the participants who were given the most choices were overwhelmed with the choices and reported infinitely less satisfaction with the choice that they made. Now, I bring up that study to highlight the fact that an abundance of choices might overload our cognitive resources. So, for example, let's just narrow in on this piece of equipment I'm sitting on right now. If you think back in the day when there were only barbells and dumbbells, you had a limited amount of choices and a limited amount of way you could train your back end or other musculature. But for me right now, I have an option of barbells, I have an option of dumbbells because that's what I have at home, and then I also have this machine. And even within this plate-loaded machine, I've got multiple ways that I can row. I've got a neutral grip, I can turn that neutral grip into an underhand grip, I can turn it back to a neutral, I can turn it overhand, I could go somewhere in between, and then I have a very wide grip on it as well. I bring this up and highlight this because even within exercise selection, there is a multitude of choices, and I think within programs, that can lead to excessive exercise selection, which is another issue that isn't going to lead to appropriate progression and appropriate adaptations. So if we zoom back out to something like, let's say, social media, it is going to bombard you with not only something like exercise selection, but multiple programs that could cause you to become overwhelmed or feel dissatisfied with the program you're currently on, which is then going to cause program switching. Something else we don't think about in terms of program switching, we've talked evolutionary things, we've talked dopamine. Now let's zoom in even further to the level of the individual and differences in personality. Personality. So what I want to focus on as far as personality goes has to do with the Big Five. Now, the Big Five is a lexical model that derive these factors, and they are universal among all humans. So in the Big Five, you have openness to new experience, you have conscientiousness, you have extroversion, you have agreeableness, and you have neuroticism. So let's just look at a few of these to see how they impact our desire to program hop. Now, with conscientiousness, a high conscientiousness person is going to be very detail-oriented. So someone in low trait conscientiousness is going to be less likely to track their progress and thereby is possibly more susceptible to program switching due to not being able to quantify and or foresee the progress that they are making in any given program. Now, moving on to something like trait agreeableness, a person high in trait agreeableness might be more likely to be convinced to switch a program as opposed to stick to the plan. Lastly, trait neuroticism, which is just consider that emotional stability. A person who is high in trait neuroticism is going to be a bit more impulsive than individuals low in trait neuroticism. Now, I think we all know that impulsivity is going to be a factor when it comes to program switching. Personality traits are just one part of what drives a person to program hop. We now know about dopamine. We now know about our ancestors' evolutionary history. We now know about the paradox of choice and how information overload can drive indecision and dissatisfaction. And now we also have the individual differences in personality. So with all these things combined and in mind, what can we do to help you keep from program hopping? The number one thing that you're going to want to do is understanding adaptation timelines. Now, if you follow Brad Schoenfeld, his work consistently shows that for strength and or hypertrophy gains, you are going to want to commit to a certain amount of time to see those adaptations occur. And that timeline is around 8 to 12 weeks. Now, can it be a little bit more than this? Can it be a little bit less than this? Yes, and you should base that on numbers that you are tracking. More on that later. But if you set your bottom end range for sticking to a program to around 8 weeks and your top end range, again, range, so there's going to be a distribution of these weeks, to around 12 weeks, I think you're going to be able to see appreciable gains and not program hop like you're having issues with. Secondly, if you are doing enough frequency and volume per body part per week, that is also going to net you optimal gains in terms of your training. So what is somewhat optimal in terms of frequency and training volume? I would say if you were hitting a body part twice a week with around 10 to 20 sets, that would place that body part for me on the front burner, and that would be enough training volume. And if you commit to that amount of volume or progressing that amount of volume over the course of 8 to 12 weeks, that is going to net you significantly more gains than starting a program for 2 weeks, feeling that initial high of the program, and then sort of tapering off for the new thing around the corner. The number two thing that you can do to build off the number one thing is to begin tracking your performance. Now, this is both in the gym and in the kitchen. So you are going to want to find some way to log your workouts. Now, whether that's paper and pencil, whether that's an app like the RP Hypertrophy app, the Strong app, or any other app out there, you're going to want to find some way to quantify things, because these will now be your indicators as opposed to feel as to whether or not you need to shift a program. As for nutrition, tracking your nutrition is going to be important because we are not going to see optimal adaptation. So in the case of this channel, bodybuilding, in that case, hypertrophy, if we are not eating for our goals. So if you are not bare minimum maintenance, preferably in a small surplus, and you're not tracking those things, you're probably not going to make significant gains. The number three thing that you're going to do to build off the last point is eat for your goals. So if you are in a cut, that is going to require that you be in a deficit. If you are in a maintenance period, then you're going to have to be at maintenance calories. And if you are in a gaining phase, you're going to want to be in a surplus. Small, medium, large surplus, you're going to want to be in a surplus, which means you're going to want to be gaining weight. So presumably this episode is about program hopping, and what I see are some of the difficulties with sticking to a program. And I think part of sticking to a program, well, the difficult part about it is that we don't see the gains visually. And I think a big confounding variable there is a lot of people aren't eating for their particular goals. So if you are not seeing the scale move, then it is going to be a lot harder to quantify whether or not you're heading in the direction you want. Now, that's not to say there's no benefit to a maintenance period. I've been in a prolonged maintenance period for a while now, and that has been very beneficial to me because I'm sort of positioning myself. But if you're not seeing the scale move either up or down, then it is going to be really hard to know whether or not you are making any significant gains, especially in terms of strength and hypertrophy. Nutrition is going to be an important variable. The number 4 thing that you're going to want to do is to reduce the noise. You're going to want to limit your fitness information overload. So for me, this is a really simple heuristic. I would say in terms of training and or nutrition, I would pick 2 to 3 experts and follow their advice. Now, if they say anything contradictory, obviously follow up with them and don't just completely give yourself over to any 1 or 2 or 3 particular experts. But by following consistently a few amount of people, you are going to reduce the noise and thereby the cognitive burden on yourself, and you're going to probably make significantly more gains in a particular direction. Now, again, you could commit to these individuals for 8 to 12 weeks, sort of like what I recommended with the program hopping, or you could commit to them for a longer amount of time and see how much of your gains you can milk out just by listening to those particular experts. But in this way, you are just freeing up your mind from the burden of looking at all the various influencers scrolling through Instagram, all the various YouTube individuals who are trying to say, hey, get on this or that program. So pick 2 or 3 individuals that you trust, that align with your goals, follow them for a while, and then reassess at the end of a period of time before you start adding in more people to listen to, or you decide to move away from that type of training. And the number 5 and last thing, stop chasing perfect, stop chasing optimal. Now, it is cliche to say, again, that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and in terms of training and your programming, I find that to be the case as well. Just remember, frequent switching is going to undermine your long-term gains. Find something that's good enough for you, stick to it for 8 to 12 weeks, and then reassess whenever you're done. Now, subscribe for some more psychology-backed fitness insights, and I will catch you all in the next episode.